Good afternoon. Calling to order this Board Commissioners Policy Meeting for the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. Today we will be discussing Policy BBBD, Board Member Removal from Office, Policy GCLE, Telecommuting, Policy DBCA, Long Range Financial Planning, and the draft of the 2019-20 Policy Committee Calendar. So with no further ado, Mr. Gant, would you like to go ahead and begin?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I just noticed there's an extra B on the agenda, so it's just BBD. Yeah, no worries. So, good afternoon, Commissioners.
I wondered where the four-letter code came from.
Yeah.
And I was just like, you know what? With my eyes dilated like this, it looks like there's three of them there. So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So, we're going to discuss policy BBD, Board Member Removal from Office. This is a new policy, and it's not a conversion of an existing rule. The purpose of today's policy is to align with amendments to the state law. In 2017, as you know, legislation was passed to remove the governor's role from appointments. So now the mayor is the sole person with authority to appoint board members and remove board members. Appointed board. So as you can see, there are 5 justifications for a board removal from office: immorality, misconduct in office, incompetency, and willful neglect of duty, and that applies to appointed board members and elected board members. And appointed board members have an additional responsibility of failure to attend at least half of scheduled board meetings in a calendar year. Now, whereas appointed board members are removed by the mayor, elected board members on this board, which will start in 2022, are only removed by the State Board of Education. So there's a distinction there. And furthermore, if you and a member of the public have any interest in getting more detailed about what is immorality, misconduct, in the appendix, there are some cases online that kind of go into detail about that. So, any questions?
So I have a question for my colleagues. How do you both feel about the minimum threshold to remove someone as far as attendance being not half of the meetings for the year? Like, if you miss 3 meetings, like, you know, I'm just curious on your perspective on that.
I think half is a lot of meetings. I think to Commissioner Berkeley's point, it's a lot to miss. So I think 3.
Well, that would have to be a statutory change, but I will say other counties, I believe in like Queen Anne, their threshold is 75%. So, you know, there are other counties where
it's a statutory change, so it would have to be a change in
Annapolis. In our legislative platform.
I mean, we certainly don't have any issue with it, but we have a really professional board who is really committed to being here. Currently, but if we had members who were challenged with schedule or things like that, I don't know. To me, I think it merits a conversation with our local delegation to see if they would be interested in
I agree.
In increasing the level of professional expectation. There's not a single member, I want to be really clear for the public, that hasn't exceeded this minimum threshold.
Right.
Like, we're all here. And when we're not here, it's because we absolutely have good cause. This just seems like, and especially as we approach a partially elected board, we want to be sure, I mean, at least half. That could be, the 5 meetings? I could come to 2.5 meetings this week, kind of thing. So I think that's a conversation, if we could put a pin in it, Christian, to talk with the delegation, and maybe just an informal conversation with more members of the full board to see if anybody says, you know, is vehemently opposed to the idea of upping that expectation.
Yeah, and to talk about it maybe it should be a percentage, some kind of percentage number as opposed to, you know, a finite number. And,
Yeah, or even maybe, and this, I don't know if this just complicates it too much, but at least half of the public board meetings and 90% of your committee meetings. So I'm just thinking about the committee structure, and we moved to a committee structure sort of after this as a way to address all the governance needs. But right now, like this is Commissioner Lynn's 2nd meeting he hasn't missed, but he's been at all of the others, so that should be okay. But if he was only here half the time, we need a new committee member.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Does that make sense? So I don't know if we want some differentiation around board like annual meetings versus, you must attend the annual meeting, or at least half of the public board meetings, but 90% of your committee meetings, or, I don't know what that looks like, but I think it merits further conversation.
What I can also do too, when it goes to first reader, I can incorporate that into the presentation, and then the full board can have a public conversation at first reader.
Perfect, and maybe even pose it as a question.
Right,
like
yeah.
Within the presentation.
Would you like a higher threshold of meetings, so.
Yeah, or even just how do you feel about this? Do we feel like this is enough of an expectation to hold for one another? Because I feel like the de facto or unwritten expectation we have for each other is extremely high compared to this. But if this is what's on paper, then this is what Annapolis also thinks we're giving. And this is what the city thinks we're giving as a minimum, when in fact the 15 to 30-hour a week volunteer commitment is significantly more than not missing half meetings.
Yeah, and I think also you might want to be very clear that board meetings includes committee meetings as well.
Right.
Because when I initially read this, I was thinking public board meetings, so.
Right, or
Yeah.
then we have to have a definitions section that
Mhm.
clarifies that. Okay.
So.
So yeah, so it's a great start, but there's some more work to flesh out in some of the details, I think.
Okay. All right, any other feedback?
Thank you. With the 5 areas, because they are mentioned in previous legal opinions, you don't think it is necessary for us to include the definition of or description of each of those 5 areas within our policy?
I don't think so, because statutorily, I don't want to, so the definitions are kind of fleshed out in case law, but I would be hesitant to, because it's not a definition in the statute. So I wouldn't want to try to interpret what I think the state board's definitions are. So I think if it were to come up and go to litigation, it would depend on the previous case law to kind of go through definitions, but I wouldn't want to put that in policy.
Okay.
Could it be generalized in a definition section, though? So people have some sort of where the edges of the sandbox might exist to go look at case law.
Possibly I have to look into that. So I can look into that for first reader also. Is there a way to kind of generalize without kind of eschewing the line of, case law versus statute?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't want to define what neglect of duty is, but it would not be bad to say what neglect of duty isn't.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
In sort of just a layperson's. All right. Anything else on that one? So now I have to go back to my big notes. read the letters. So then we are moving on to policy GCLE, also 4 letters.
Yes. That one is actually 4.
No, okay. And that's telecommuting. Is that somebody from operations maybe joining us, or? No problem. Is anybody from DBCA here to talk about we can flip those agenda items if that's okay with everybody else in the room?
Yeah.
Okay. If that works for you, we'll welcome you to the table. Oh, probably. Christian?
Oh, I might have taken.
Clicker theft, clicker theft. Thank you, Allison.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Courtney Desabade, Special Assistant to the Chief Financial Officer, presenting DBCA Long Range Financial Planning Policy. All right. This policy is being put in place to outline the development of a long-term financial forecasting and reporting process for Baltimore City Public Schools. This is to provide insight into the school district's future financing capacity. What that means, and I'm going to veer off from the slides a bit as I tend to. It is very difficult for any institution, especially one with the level of financing that we are engaged in, to project or plan for a specific fiscal year without an outlook that goes out, further than that period of time. When we make decisions, financial decisions within the current year for the upcoming year, a lot of it has to be based on where we see ourselves in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Currently, we don't have a policy in place that dictates that we have to have this sort of process. This is general financial practice process, and it's something that we've engaged in unofficially. So having this policy is sort of an accountability standard for the finance department, for the district, to make sure we're planning appropriately and budgeting in accordance with our long-range financial planning. And it's also a terrific resource for cabinet and the board members as well in a lot of the activities that we're engaging, whether it's advocacy or community engagement and so forth, to have that sort of information at hand and referenceable in a way that is, usable to everyone involved. So the rationale, like I said, there's no specific board policy. Lack of proper and consistent long-range financial planning can hamper the district's ability to provide decision makers with necessary data, and the data is necessary for navigating financial challenges as well as long-term sustainability. Initially, we had discussed with PCAB presenting at the June 6th meeting. We had some conversations about the scheduling of this presentation, whether it would be at this meeting or not, and we had rescheduled the PCAB meeting, so we're going to re-engage with them as to when we can get back on their agenda to present it there. We're also going to engage with Cabinet, and this will be largely around the process of the presentation and what data will be, and some of the more minutia, what sort of data will be incorporated into the projections, both on the revenue and expenses side, what is most useful and most presentable, most understandable. There are other factors which, we'll have to consider going forward with this as well, especially as the district looks into some of our system changes, like, we've had discussions on an ERP. There are a lot of functions that in a long-term forecast can be supplemented by the right system. We can get information in different ways or treat information in different ways, which could help supplement a long-range financial plan as well. So those are things that we want to consider going forward. So the summary of the policy, the scope, the CEO designee shall conduct a long-range financial planning analysis of projected revenue and expenses for city schools that extends at least 5 years into the future from the current fiscal year. Industry standards usually are somewhere between 5 and 10 years, with school districts, especially ones with ours where funding is largely dependent on year-to-year changes. It makes the out-year forecasting a lot more, a lot less credible, I would say. So we're actually kind of deciding between a 3 and 5 year period. We thought a 5 year period, particularly the fact that we're going to be updating it annually, would still allow us to get a decent outlook based on where we are at that point in time. But because we're updating it annually, we can make changes from year to year that won't affect the credibility of the out years as much. So revenue forecast would include general operating funds from the state, city, federal, et cetera, various sources. The expense forecast would include all general operating fund dollars, whether it's school or central office. And the policy is not apply to any other ad hoc requests for projections or updates that may be made by the board or by cabinet as well. The frequency, as I mentioned, the plan would be updated on an annual basis. One of the aspects where I'm seeking feedback from you, from the policy committee, is as to the appropriate date you would think for that update. We had discussed probably having or ensuring that we have the update done before the conclusion of the budget process or before the final budget vote. Ideally, we would like to have the information for decision-making as current as possible, so if we had it, going into the budget process in the fall. But the difficulty with that is that we usually close the books, between, August and September, which is when we get the final, financial data. So there's a bit of a time rub there, especially with all the things that are going on with the budget process at, around the Christmas period, early January period, where we make it very difficult to finalize the long-range plan while, working on the budget process as well. So we kind of wanted to see from you if you had an expressed, opinion one way or the other as to how you felt the timing should work out.
So while we ponder that one,
Yeah.
and thank you for the thought-provoking question. In my initial response, what seems like it makes sense to me is if it came sort of either as a forensic sort of post-July 1,
Right.
this is where we were. This was our plan, this is how we hit it, this is now how we're going to tweak to move forward. So sort of in that wrapping the actual fiscal.
Right.
Or coming after the October 1 recount numbers to say, here's our long-range plan 10 down the road, and this is how it has to wobble this year based on this actual enrollment. Because both of those would front-load it for a budget process to start in December, January. But I don't know, thoughts, ideas? And then you all are the financial experts, so.
Yeah, my tendency would be to to time it for around, this time of year, closer to the summertime. It would be based, if we did it that way though, it would be based on the prior year's closed numbers. But this would give us the information leading into the process development, in the fall. And enough time to, do the analysis, present the analysis, kind of digest it and use it for some of our, at this point in the year, we're planning not just, the budget process, but the whole, school year and sequence of events. Cabinet is going through the process of determining how things kind of fit together. So I think, that probably is the best space, at least to us, that, we kind of see it fitting in at this point. But again, it's open to what you think on here.
And I think it would be helpful for our annual meeting if we kind of had some of that information during. So I think this time is ideal, giving it a July or June 30.
Yeah, the only reason I said July, early August was if we needed the year-end numbers to be complete.
Yeah.
But this time of year does also give us the time to dig in and really talk about it, because we're not yet stressed about hiring, and we are, don't get me wrong, but
Not
HR
as
is us.
stressed.
But we're finished being stressed about new charter applications, we're finished being stressed about budget. So this June, July, if you have enough time in June, otherwise July, August, I would think.
Okay.
Commissioner Berkeley, thoughts?
I don't think I really have anything to add to that. I think we do want to listen to what's available when, because we
Right.
might want it now, but it might not make sense, because we could meet and talk about information that's so incomplete that we're just spinning our wheels.
Right.
So I think we are dependent on knowing what information can be available when, that can be useful to talk about, so.
Right. So the other probably benefit of that is the funding information that we're going to receive in January will be based on, that same sort of time period. So if we're doing it around, July, August or so, it gives us, somewhat of a slight preview as to what we may expect, or based on our projections, to be the numbers that we would see in January. The only caveat being that would be updated based on, like you said, the September 30th numbers as they occur. So maybe possibly something we can look at as an opportunity for an update, whether it's through our ops committee budget updates. If we said, there's just something specific or significant that happens through the enrollment changes that we can incorporate, or, and then we can provide an intermediary update on that.
Yeah, and committees could maybe dig in deeper, and then it's just a part of the enrollment update.
Okay.
For the full board.
And just going back to our annual business meeting, it is usually the end of June, I think, at least has been the last few years. So if it's the end of June, we're really talking about needing numbers in June, not in July, August, right? It would, so if that's possible. Or maybe whatever numbers are possible then would be worth our looking at that annual business meeting.
Okay.
I'm fine with that. I don't know if you were finished with the presentation.
The last thing was the content. So part of what would be incorporated, or what would be incorporated here, would include analysis of the financial environment, revenue expenditure forecasts, fund balance positions, monitoring mechanisms. So what essentially that would be is indicators that we would develop, in advance of how we would measure the district's financial health, things that we could use as metrics that we could measure long-term, not just in the first year, not so much in the first year, but as we compare years subsequently. Things that we would keep essentially as shortcut indicators, things that you say, well, this goes up or this goes down. This is something to kind of keep an eye on, or keep a threshold, or where we'd want to be ideally within certain things. So we can develop those in terms of what we would like those to be, and then we can monitor them going forward from one presentation to the next as we look at the long-range financial plan.
So I have a philosophical question on the purpose behind this. So are we looking at this as a way of documenting for the public perception that Baltimore City is fiscally accountable?
Mhm.
Are we looking at this as a transformational lever for how can we develop more revenue? Or is this something else?
I think it's a first step in a lot of different processes. Whether we're looking internally or externally, a lot of decision-making financially, like I said before, advocacy or whatever conversations we're having are based on our expectations and financial outlook, our measure of our fiscal health, our measure of where we expect to be on the expenses, where do we see those increasing or decreasing, things that we make determinations on in terms of improving efficiencies or where we should divert resources, whether they're warranted or not. A lot of that decision-making is based on these projections and where we see ourselves. What this is essentially formalizing that process, I think. It's something that we've done through different methods and maybe shorthand versions and changed in different ways depending on how it was phrased or what the request was. So this is probably formalizing it and making it a little bit more official, a little bit more standardized, and being able to use that in those different platforms as necessary. And also that we have a consistent data set that we're using for those things, that we're not doing, different ad hoc sort of developments for those.
So I think to that end, enhancing the purpose statement to make it more aspirational and clear might help, as well as in future iterations of this policy. Because right now, the purpose statement pretty much sounds like a check accountability, which is important, don't get me wrong. But if we're looking at this as a way to say, we're committed to long-range planning to make sure we're not always caught in we got to cover today in order to survive. But how do we become more viable to really, really make things happen for each and every student?
Okay.
Other thoughts?
With the 3 to 5 year, 3 or 5 year projection, can you talk a little bit more about the thought process around the 3 year versus the 5 year? Because in the policy draft, I think it says 5, but then in the presentation it says 3. But you explained you started to explain earlier the differences. So can you talk a little bit more about that 3 year? And then every year you all will be coming back with an update or like some amendments to the plan. What is the every year? Can you talk about those things?
Right. So initially, our thinking was a 3-year plan. We have since updated that, which is why I'm saying 5 years now. When we did the initial draft, we did have 3 years initially. And part of the thinking there, like I said, general industry standards, you want to give yourself a 5 to 10 year outlook. We know that it's difficult in our circumstances because of how drastically our funding situation can change from year to year. However, we still do have the ability to project, at least on the expenses side, those extra 2 years fairly comfortably, more or less. And we felt a little more comfortable with it also knowing that we're updating it every year. And I'm poorly using the word. It should not be the word update. We're providing the analysis anew each year. So we're going to redo the analysis.
The analysis on how
the long-range financial plan.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. So the update is a poor word, and actually when legal reviewed it, they suggested that as well, that we change the word update. So they're right on point there. Update is a poor word. We're going to redo the analysis every year and provide fresh information. And part of that is not something that we had fleshed out in here, but part of that would essentially be a look at how this year's analysis compared to last year's to see where, we were necessarily, close or, we had some room to be more accurate, so.
So in the compliance section, for the CEO or the chief responsible, that would be that yearly analysis done then each year?
That's correct, and that's what we're discussing in terms of the timing of when we would present that, potentially June to July, somewhere in that region.
Thanks. And I'm glad you mentioned the legal review, because that wasn't clear in the presentation or in the policy draft if it was referenced with the legal office. So I'm glad we are doing that. So if when this comes for first reader, it would have gone through them again?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
No problem.
So in looking at this again as trying to make it as transformational as possible and trying to support the great work everyone's doing as much as possible, would this, and maybe this is a question for Allison, so teeing it up there, would it make sense to use this policy as a place to create a standing ad hoc financial long-range planning committee? Financial planning is certainly not in the wheelhouse of, I'm going to go with me, but possibly not the 5 of us sitting here. And it's complicated and it's complex. And we have the state, we have the federal, we have the city, we have the perception that Baltimore City can't manage money, all of these pieces, would it make sense to use this policy to say, we're gonna have a standing committee with members from the banking community, members from the investment community, that are gonna be thought partners, just as in the, teacher recruitment ad hoc, or the enrollment, and maybe make it more PCAB solid or CCAC solid. And I don't know, I don't have a horse in the race at all, just throwing out for discussion.
So I think having, advisors like that on a long-range a long-range financial planning committee would make sense. I don't think it needs to be in a policy or makes sense to be in a policy. I mean, a lot of those committees we convene when when it's an appropriate time, but we don't have, I can't think of many examples where we have a standing committee that's established in policy. I think a charter advisory board may be the only one that I can think of. And I think, locking yourselves into having a group like that is not necessarily meeting the needs of the organization. And we have regularly, and we do regularly convene them when they make sense. So we have an operations advisory committee. We had a short-term transportation work group committee that did some work and then ended. So they're not permanent. We had the enrollment task force. So we've had a number of groups like that come in for a period of time. I don't think it really makes sense to create it as a permanent standing committee in policy, but more that we should use a group like that when it makes sense, especially in the first go-round when we're developing a long-term financial plan.
And that's where the question came from, is the first time I see this in the presentation, I don't want to just see yes PCAB. I want to look and see that people were sought out that have not just extremely immediate knowledge, but understand the long-term trends of this kind of investment and this kind of work. And that's so beyond my scope that I just am like.
So with that, what other stakeholders could potentially be engaged in the development of this process? Would it be appropriate to have, for this policy particularly?
Yeah.
Yeah, because in the fourth slide, it says PCAB in the cabinet, but with that conversation that you all were having, that potentially could be a way to capture some of that input, potentially?
Yeah, because PCAB and the cabinet are going to be highly invested in education, but not necessarily understanding, compound interest over time and kinds of things.
I'm wondering about, and I'll just throw this out, something like the Greater Baltimore Committee. Do we seek out assistance from the business community in the metropolitan area on any regular? There was a time when we did, decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then that went away, and I don't know why. There may have been good reasons, but I just throw it out for people to think about, because our revenues come from, obviously we know exactly which sources, but that how that money is spent and where the political will is to give it to whom is.
But again, I guess I would think that the engagement of outside folks would be more important for the development of the plan than it is the policy. The policy is pretty broad. I mean, the policy is that we will have a policy, and I don't think you would want much more in the policy. You want it to be a pretty broad, expectation of priorities and purpose, and not so much what's in it, in the plan. It's when you have doing the planning that you would want people with expertise about long-term financial planning, that you would want people involved. I think it would be hard to get much of a meaningful input on such a broad policy from folks.
Yeah, no, my question was just, does the policy need to state that in the plan, we will include local community experts that have a vested interest in the financial well-being of the Baltimore region?
Yeah, that's what I intended
Yeah.
also, was just that should that be part of the plan, that this would be a part of the process.
I mean, again, I think to make that a regular part of the plan, I'm not sure I would want to put that in the policy to be part of the plan. I think it would be more that, that's something we should be doing, especially when we formulate the first plan. But, there are a lot of policies we have in place, and it's hard to keep up with all of them. I think we must be nearing 100 at this point. We had 80 some a year or so ago. I don't know how many policies we have at this point. It's just a bit hard to keep up with them. I don't like to put in policies, requirements that are just a little bit hard to keep up with if we're going to update this plan regularly. So I think in the initial development of the plan, I think it makes sense, and I think, we should be developing a group of regular stakeholders in the finance community that can advise us, and I think that does make sense, and we have been very committed to doing that in all areas. So I don't have a problem with that. I think the idea that you would say in the policy that you're always going to do that, that's a hard thing to keep up, and I don't think necessary for an annual update.
It doesn't, but it will be necessary for us is to continue communicating to new board members as we transition, that it's an expectation that there's expert community input and impacted community input on every single policy. And so that if that doesn't come through, that future boards are insistent that happens. So if it's not
more like-
formalized, it's got to be informally.
So maybe it's more like that you report out in the development of at least of the initial plan, that you report out how you've engaged, like who was engaged in the development of the plan. So not being prescriptive about that, but who was engaged in the development of the plan and how they were engaged. Sure.
All right, thank you very much.
No problem.
One quick question, and I don't actually even know how to ask the question. But in this, looking at the source of the revenue initially, and there's some conversation, we're the only LEA in the state that our local jurisdiction has a different responsibility than the state because of the city-state partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a place in this long-range policy or in the development of the plan for this policy to look at the fiscal capacity of the city to manage and be more like Howard County or Montgomery County is to their schools, to their LEA, versus the smaller contribution that the city makes?
Yeah, I think that would be difficult to incorporate in this specifically, and would kind of subvert the purpose of this as it's designed. Maybe there is some room where that is incorporated in some of our larger discussions or in our annual budgeting discussions, but I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it going into this policy for the long-range plan specifically.
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure that it was not an oversight, so thank you.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
All right, so we are now going to return to policy GCLE, telecommuting. Chief Grant Skinner, welcome.
Good afternoon. Happy to be here to talk about policy GCLE. To start with the purpose here, across organizations, locally and more globally, telecommuting is becoming an option for employees more and more. This can allow employees to do their regular work from a location other than their normal work site, which can provide flexibility to everyone, but also to people who, otherwise have to commute or have to balance getting back and forth from childcare pickups and drop-offs and other things like that. So our intent here is to try to provide that flexibility as a benefit in alignment with what a lot of other organizations are doing. We looked at both the state and the federal government in terms of progress they're making in this area. So here's an example from the state where they organize this out of the Department of Budget and Management. So you just see a quote there, recognizing the changing nature of work today, the interest in being family friendly, helping the environment, and really in the end, again, as a benefit, helping their agencies to recruit and retain great people. At the federal level, the Office of Personnel Management coordinates teleworking, as they call it. And similarly, they talk about the ability to keep people who are resilient and results-oriented, while also giving them some flexibility to just do their work from a different place. So in our policy, first, as drafted, it would allow eligible employees with agreement from their supervisor to work up to 1 day per week from an alternate work location. That could be their home, it could be a co-working space, or some other location. The policy authorizes the Human Capital Office to determine and publish categories of eligible employees, and specifies for now that at least that excludes school-based employees on days that school is in session. Then it outlines expectations for the workspace in an alternate work location. There's some sort of legalistic aspects there, but also just want to make sure that employees who are working in an alternate work location have access to the things that they need to do their work. Then requires the employee and supervisor to agree on a work plan that actually outlines the specific work that they'll complete on any day that they are choosing to telecommute. And then the final highlight here is that it is very explicit that telecommuting, while intended to provide the flexibility I talked about earlier, is not intended to be a substitute for using leave time, like sick time, or for childcare. So there's a specific provision that indicates that, if you have a child in the home, you have to have someone else there caring for the child on a day that you are telecommuting. There are a bunch of additional documents for review there, and this just lists what they are and what their purpose is. So the first is a telecommuting agreement. This is just something that a supervisor and employee sign off on to just formalize their agreement to telecommute, period. Then a telecommuting prep and info form is something that a supervisor and employee walk through to just make sure that that they're ready to begin telecommuting in terms of having a work plan, having checked the alternate work location criteria, and more. The third item is actually an alternate work location, so it's a self-certification where an employee goes through and checks off to make sure that their space meets the requirements. The work schedule simply confirms which day or days over some period of time the supervisor and employee have agreed to have the employee telecommute. And then the work plan I referred to is what is completed for each day of telecommuting. And then the final resource that is posted is a list of FAQs, which really covers the same things as the policy and regulations and these other documents in a sort of easy to read Q&A format. So I am available to answer questions you may have.
All right, well, first off, thank you. And in an organization like this, trying to figure out alternate work paths is a little bit like trying to do individualized instruction in classrooms, so appreciate your modeling that great behavior for us. Commissioner Berkeley, anything come up? A couple of things that come up for me that some of them are addressed within the policy, but I'd like you to pull it up just for public space. The first one is, do we have the technology capacity to supervise remote working? I know in a lot of other corporations, when people are working remotely, they log into a separate server in the morning and say, I'm online now, and my son who lives with me, he gets a printout at the end of the day. Here's the number of clicks you did, here's the times it's and it's a little micromanagey, don't get me wrong, but it ensures that the workforce is working. So your thoughts along that and/or what's included in the policy itself?
Sure. I appreciate that example as an alternate example of what we've outlined here. So I think, to use your language, this is a little less micromanagey in a sense that, there's not, although I think we have some technical capability to do some of the things that you described.
He
but
looks around to see if the TV's
this-
watching.
This policy and its regulation does not call for that to happen. This, again, is the purpose of the work plan. Honestly, compared to some organizations, some folks would consider it to be micromanaging, that you need to complete a work plan for each day that you are telecommuting, which is what this policy does call for. I think there's an interest here in having appropriate oversight from a supervisor without it being, I'm actually making sure that you are logged in from this time to this time and answer this many calls and send this many emails.
So would the need to submit a daily work plan be job description based? So if I can telecommute easily on a daily basis, do I still need to complete one every day, or is this for more the unusual, I'm gonna work from home today, rather than the, you know what, just work from home people?
Yeah, so for the public's clarification, I'll say, for now, this draft actually says that no one can be approved to telecommute more than 1 day a week. So even though we have some employees who may believe that they can fulfill their full job responsibilities while telecommuting regularly, right now, that's not what this policy calls for. It is just 1 day a week. And the intent of the work plan is not that it would just be an outline of the job responsibility, so I shouldn't be sending my supervisor the same proposed work plan for every day that I'm telecommuting because it outlines my scope of duty. Instead, it is saying, I'm going to be telecommuting on Friday. Here are the deliverables that I'm going to be completing during that time, or here are the meetings that I'm going to hold. So with that level of specificity, so it is tied to the duties and responsibilities of the job, but is actually a specific plan between an employee and a supervisor about the work products for that day.
So this would be more, and this is just my own clarification, this would be more for the person who is a feasibility manager for operations and says, you know what, I've got all these invoices to just log, can I do that from home? Versus, say, the ILED who has an office here, but is out in schools and says, you know what, I have 3 hours left in my day, my principals are finished with me, I'm gonna work from a coffee shop. So that's not considered telecommuting, correct? Or?
The ILED example?
Right, an itinerant's the wrong word for that kind of an employee, but the employee who has an office, but also is expected to be out in the field as much as possible. If someone sees them at Starbucks, should they expect they've submitted a work plan to work remotely, or is it by job description? And I'm not trying to get too far in the weeds. I'm just trying to help.
I think it's a legitimate question, because you're right, we do have a number of people who spend a lot of time going back and forth between schools, and so it is reasonable that some of those folks that, when they visit school X, they might just stop at an internet cafe and actually work a little bit in between, as opposed to going back to North Avenue and then going back to the other school they have to be at in an hour. That makes no sense. So I agree, and so I do think, it does make sense to try to make sure we're clear about when these work plans are required. And so that we're not going to run into a situation where another employee complains that, so-and-so didn't submit a work plan when they were at Starbucks. I saw them at Starbucks.
Right, yeah. And again, I'm not trying to get in management. I'm just seeing potential legal challenges of this.
Yeah, I would just add that there are, whether people are at their typical work location, or they are someone who is out in, back and forth in the field, or they are working under this policy at an alternate work location, everyone has breaks, everyone, has times during the day that they are not, engaged in their work. And so I think there are always, and in any of those three options, a time where you can see someone doing something that is not on task. I think the emphasis here is that the work plan has an accountability measure, because you're saying to your supervisor, this is what I'm going to complete in the time that I'm working from another location.
But I guess what Commissioner Hassan is saying is that they might very well, it may not be a break, they may be working in between. They might, take a couple hours to work in between, because doing that is more efficient than coming all the way back to North Avenue in between a couple off-site visits. And that if the expectation is that they would have submitted a work plan for that, they probably aren't doing that. And nor would it be particularly efficient for somebody to email John Davis, I'm going to be at Starbucks for 2 hours, this is what I'll be doing. I mean,
And then they get 65 emails and can't get to their work plan. You know, I stopped to finish up this IEP, and then now I dealt with a parent the whole time, so I didn't finish my IEP. What's the ramification? And again, supporting the idea, just trying to help.
I think that what you're expressing is a little bit of how do you find the right mix between making sure there's some accountability, but also making an accountability that's actually doesn't create other problems. And
trusting professionals that they're doing their work, and if it makes more sense to do it at a coffee shop than it does to drive from, Dunbar back here to go back to NAF,
yes.
that makes no sense. So, and even though they're close.
Yeah.
Another line of questioning, since that one, I don't think there's answers for it, it's just sort of there for you, is what about data privacy and FERPA on other networks? So I'm at Starbucks on my computer sending emails. What's our exposure risk there from technology?
Sure. So just as when someone currently could be working off-site, if they're at any location other than a school or other district facility, they can't access our anything on our network unless they log in through the secure VPN. So someone could continue to do that, just as right now I can go home in the evening and do that, through that secure way of logging into the network. So this would not change anything about that.
Being on an external server doesn't put us at greater risk. Okay, perfect. What about snow days? What impact does this have on snow days?
Yeah, I am smiling at the question because I know certainly at the federal level, that's actually one of the things that led agencies to start thinking more about teleworking is how to ensure that they could get productivity out of employees when the weather didn't allow for them to come to work. And I'm smiling because we didn't consider this. So right now, there's nothing included in this policy that would affect the way we operate on snow days. So, everyone who doesn't come to work right now because of inclement weather would continue not to come to work on inclement weather days.
But it is a really good flag because it is, when you work in federal government, they say liberal leave is in place or telecommuting. And so it would make sense to be able to say that because we do say sometimes that liberal leave is in place, but we don't have a provision for teleworking. So it would make sense to have a section here. It's a great flag about what happens on a day when, your own kid's school is closed even though we're open and so you can't quite get in.
I was going to telecommute, but it's a snow day. Is my work plan now just postponed, or I was going to telecommute anyway? Am I now responsible? I'd filled out my form. I said I was going to be out working at home on Thursday, and now it's a snow day. Or I was going to be there doing it anyway. Now am I responsible?
Oh, that's fine. I was thinking of a situation where somebody says, well, I don't want to take leave, but can I just work from home?
Yeah, I think it's all of it. It's all of it, yeah. And then what about teachers that have classrooms on digital platforms? It's this around your HR piece of it, but there's teaching and learning implications from this. There's, parent engagement, all sorts of pieces that are beyond the scope of this, but that this opens a can up for.
Yeah.
Then the last piece that I have is any thoughts towards school culture. And so the three of us are faculty colleagues together. Because Ronald is the social worker and has to be writing up IEPs all day, he's going to go do that in, his jammies, and I'm going to be there servicing kids. But I have to write IEP goals half the morning. Could I get released to go do that at a coffee shop? Just how are we going to balance he can and I can't? Or I am in front of 30 students every day. There's no way I can ever work in my jammies. But you get to work in your jammies any day you feel like it and submit a work plan. How do we make that so that professionals understand that, yes, it's because she has a different professional job. Yes, it's because I have, Just thoughts around school culture.
But currently, it says that no school employees could work at home when school's in session.
Yeah, I was gonna, in response to the last thing you said, and then this, just, I guess I'll state it this way. This is I would say a pretty conservative version of a telecommuting policy.
Okay.
In the sense, again, that it really limits how often someone is eligible, for one thing, and then also, at a minimum, would exclude anyone who works in a school on a day school is in session. So I would say, actually, your question about culture may be a question about how to manage culture both within offices and not in other locations other than schools, and between schools and those locations like district office. And I think a focus that we took as we created this was to maintain what I would say is the sacred relationship between a supervisor and an employee, so that in every single case, this is approved on a case-by-case basis. And certainly, people, as always, can go to staff investigations or go to the Human Capital Department if they think that they are somehow being treated unfairly. But it really leaves the authority for approving this with a supervisor who is saying, yes, like, given the nature of your duties, given the nature of our office and our work, I'm able to approve you to telecommute. Whereas for another employee doing some different work or with different circumstances, that may not be approved.
And if the employee, for some reason, didn't agree with that, they would go through normal grievance channels, so there doesn't need to be any statement of appeal or anything in this policy, correct?
I mean, that's how it is drafted now.
Okay, and that makes sense. Thoughts? All right, thank you.
Okay,
And
thank
thank you
you.
for trying to figure out ways we can move our human capital in this into the 21st century and be more employee-friendly. I actually am going to do a point of privilege here, and Mr. Gant, I have a question for you now that I can read again. My eyes were dilated earlier, just so people know, about the board member removal policy. Do we need a timeline or a due process, either in a regulations for that or within the policy itself? As far as you're going to be notified, you're going to get a certified letter that says, and then you've got 6 weeks to reconcile your behavior, or?
I think we could potentially take a look at that. I mean, since it is driven by an outside body, I think we could probably talk about the notification.
Yeah, and it might need to have a conversation with the mayor's office then about what kind of, it just seems like right now the policy just says you can be removed, but how? Like, is the board exec going to come and have a conversation? Do you get a warning? You know, do you get a policy reminder? There seems like there's a due process missing.
Okay, yeah, like I said, this is based on a statute, so it had to be a conversation about what can we accomplish in policy versus what would have to be a statutory change.
I think it's something to consider, because when the members come on elected at large, and if they're potentially removed, is there someone that serves in their interim or not? But I think that is legislative, statutory, as you said, as that comes up in the future.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry for being spiral about that, but I just got to my notes. So, last piece on our agenda today is the draft 2019-20 Policy Committee calendar.
Hi, everyone. Joe Strake.
Welcome.
So this is the calendar based on feedback from all the chiefs. We're trying to limit the amount of policies. Like today, we had 3 policies. It's a lot of reading for you all. It's a lot of reading for the public. So as Allison alluded to earlier, we've passed a lot of policies over the last few years. So this year, we intentionally tried to limit the amount of policies so that we can, make sure that our policies that we've implemented are being done with fidelity. This past year, we launched the equity policy, so that was a pretty big lift, as well as the sex discrimination, JBA, I think, JBB, thank you. So that was another one that has a lot of implications. So we want to make sure that those are all being honored. Not that we can't do a lot of things at once, because we can, but this was intentional this year. So if you have any questions or additions or removals or anything like that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can at this point.
Joe, while Commissioner Berkeley and McFadden get a chance to look this over, can you just talk about about the organization, like why where they win in the calendar and why? If there's any rationale for pieces that you really thought had to wait till after October 1 or should be during the budget cycle?
It's a great question. So everything is done intentionally. Chiefs requested specific months in some cases, or said, please don't give us anything in the fall, or things like that. So literally everything. And Christian is a perfect example. He asked that the BLA, BLB, BLC be done as soon as possible. And then he said, while BCA could wait till the end of the year. So then it was placed on the calendar accordingly. And that's the case with all of the policies you'll see on the calendar.
Questions? Commissioner McFadden?
Thanks. With that, with what you just said, for March, would the operator-led schools, would that be appropriate during that time, or perhaps a little later, maybe in June? I know that often, from my experience this past year, the Office of New Initiatives has been pretty busy with the charter renewal process and even the policy. So would it be ideal to maybe move that to June?
So I believe that if Trevor wants to come up here, I spoke with Angela Alvarez when this was being scheduled, and she had requested it for the May meeting. And I think the reason
This is March.
March meeting rather, because that's kind of in between the operator renewal process and the new charter process. That's really they have like 2 down months during the year, and I believe that would be one of them. But I'll defer to Trevor here.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Trevor Roberts, a specialist in the Office of New Initiatives. March is the time we chose for that because it is kind of between our renewal process and our new charter application. So like later in the year, like around June would be when we are doing the new charter application presentations to the board. So March is a good time for us.
Okay.
I would say an okay time. I don't think there's ever a good time
Yeah.
for you.
The least problematic time, maybe.
No, I'm finished with
And
that.
also, one thing that I did want to flag, I just wanted to make sure that you all got this so you could give us as much input as possible. But one policy that I already know needs to be moved, that was requested by our chief legal counsel, Ms. Turner, is the ACB sexual harassment policy. That on the surface, it seems that it might be an update, but she's requesting that we do a JBB level of community engagement on this policy, so there's going to be a lot of changes. So she had requested that be moved to later in the year. So that is one change that's going to happen. It's definitely going to go, and that's a joint effort between our chief human capital officer and our chief legal counsel, but that will be moved from October.
Thanks. I would like to see an update on the equity policy within this next year. I'm not sure how we could fit that in, maybe a year from, I don't know, last week. But I know that a part of that policy says that they will be doing like an annual check or continuous check, so I would just be interested to hear more about that next year.
And question on that. So traditionally, in this particular committee, we only use this as a forum to do for staff to propose policy changes. So I'm not sure if that update would better be served for the public board meeting rather than at policy committee.
So for most committees, Joe, I would completely agree with, or most policies, I'd agree with you. Because we passed this policy allowing the flexibility of language and understanding there were some things that needed to be tightened up, I think hearing it back in this policy, in this committee makes sense for this time around for that policy.
Woody?
Yeah, And maybe even rather than waiting a year, doing an update in like November or December with where the language went.
So I think we are going to be working with outside folks to review the language and provide guidance on it. And so I do think it will be less than a year. But yeah, I mean, probably more.
Yeah, November, December is aspirational, but just saying that the
It
biggest point is
might-
that I think it needs to come back to this committee, and I think sooner than a year.
So I think, November, December frame makes sense with, it could change, but I think that's around the time. I think it's okay to bring it back here and then go back with any changes to the language and then back to the full committee. Because it would be, if we change the language, have to go through a full reader process, so.
And I'd just like to use this as an example for the public. When they look at this calendar and say, what, they're only doing a nursing mother's policy in April? Understanding that things get shifted all the time, that the policy committee calendar has to be responsive to the legislative calendar, so that when they look at this, if they say, well, they're not doing anything, understand that this allows, that some of the spaces allow for flexibility, allows for adaptability, and for adding things like, no, we want this update. So, others on that?
And finally, policy IKA, it's on grading and reporting. It hasn't been reviewed since June 2011. And I'm not sure if it would be wise for us to take a look at it to see if there are any things that may need to be amended or tweaked within that policy. I looked at it last night. I don't know where it will fall on the calendar, if it would actually need to come through committee or to the full board, but I think it is wise for us to take a look at it since it's been about 8-9 years almost that it's been reviewed.
Thank you. I'll talk to the chief academic officer and chief legal counsel and see what their recommendations are.
Thanks.
So there's two pieces that I see that I would like to see added at some point. And one is to Commissioner McFadden's first point about the equity policy review. So there is a equity or a policy update calendar. I think it would be beneficial to take some time either during the August or the September meeting to just go over what's the annual calendar for policy updates and when are people going to get them, as well as what's the marketing plan, whether that you call it marketing or you call it communication, how is this information getting to teachers? So, for example, I'm highly invested in the wellness policy. We adopted a wellness policy 4 years ago. I go out into schools, and almost every single time I'm in a school, I see some violation of the wellness policy. So just an update from either, I don't know if it's your office, Allison, Joe, I don't know where it comes from, but how do principals learn about policies? Is there a graphic? Is there a calendar? Do they know? Do they understand? And then once again, what is the process for teachers, parents, and community members to say, I think there's a policy violation here. So something like that added, I think, would be really beneficial for us. Mr. Gant, sorry,
Just a point of
almost
clarification.
called you Commissioner.
Just a
Sorry.
point of clarification for the public, we did look at IK this year.
Mhm.
We still need to receive the policy so we can post it.
And
But it was-
IK, just for everybody who doesn't remember numbers and letters.
IKA, which is grading.
Great, yeah.
So we looked at it this year. We just need to receive it so we can post it. That's why
Yep.
it says 2011 on board docs.
And we have gone over,
Because it was approved by the board.
It was approved by the board, yeah, I believe in May 14th, but we just need to receive it so we can post it.
and we've had other conversations about weighted grades and about grade reporting times and pluses and minuses during my tenure, at least, as a board, but I don't know if they made it to policy. The other piece is, when I met with PCAB and Mr. Gant about setting this calendar, one of the policy updates that we had requested be made is currently there are COMA requirements for minimum expectations for what a well-rounded education is, but Baltimore City doesn't have a policy that states what every student should be able to expect as far as content around arts education, health, physical education, science, and social studies. So I'm not sure where that space is in the calendar, but I personally would be very invested in seeing something that just simply says to the public that our commitment to whole child, yes, it includes social and emotional learning, but it includes it. It is not completely, that's not the the entire soup to nuts on what we talk about when we mean whole child. So I don't know if that's not on there intentionally, if there's a reason, or if it just got overlooked, but would like to see it there. Others? Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Allison, anything? Okay. All right, Joe, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
This seems like a simple piece of paper, but I hope the public understands that this is 20 to 40 people meeting on a really regular basis to try and figure this out, crosswalking it with legislative, with needs, with board rules, with trying to be proactive about imagining and envisioning where we've got gaps, where we need policy to help support. And then understanding that when you look at policy in the moment, as we can see from so many federal and state laws, they don't always get the consequences you wanted. So how are we responsive enough? So this is big work, so thank you, staff. With that, do we have public comment, folks, Mr. Gant?
We did not receive any
Okay.
sign up for public comment.
So I will reach out to the gallery, as has become our habit. Julie, would you like to address the group? Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Hassan. I just wanted to thank all of the staff for their hard work on implementing the Baltimore Arts Education Initiative and the large arts education strategic plan this year. We've made some significant progress, and I would just like to reiterate my support for a policy that calls back to COMAR, the fact that that a well-rounded education does include the arts, phys ed, and health, in addition to social and emotional learning. That's all. Thank you.
I'm looking at the COMAR. Would it be something that we would have to specify in policy if it is already in COMAR?
So many of our policies are actually COMAR translations to how they're going to be lived experiences
In
here.
Baltimore City?
Yeah, and we have nothing about curriculum as far as related to Encore content area, as far as time recommendations, content, or experiential outcomes, other than graduation requirements. So we do have that at the high school level. But K-8, it's missing. But it exists in COMAR.
Okay.
So, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else here to join us in chat today? All right. Thank you. Well, with that, our next meeting.
So I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Would that be something we recommend to be placed on the calendar?
That was my request, yes. And I think that, Julie, is that what I'm hearing from you as well?
Okay.
And when we met with PCAB, they were also in favor of that being on there as well.
So I think, then we just gonna have to look at the calendar and figure out what things we switch out or move.
And where it fits. So with that, our next, when you blow things up to size font 70, it takes a lot of scrolling. Our next meeting is July 16th from 3:30 to 5:30 in this room. We'll talk about policies BLA, which is procedures in appeals and hearings, which is a conversion of a board rule, I believe. And BLC, which is procedures in appeals and hearings, also under a different article. So with that, we are officially adjourned at, somebody else has to tell me what time it is because I can't read that small yet.
4:39.
4:39. Thank you very much.